question for everybody.
Go ahead.
What are the ingredients of a banana sandwich?
Well, first you get yourself a sandwich and you put it on a plate. You take another cup and then you fill it up with hurt. What do you add to that, Michael?
A banana and 2 slices of Roman meal? Sure.
Why so specific about the Roman meal and not the brand of banana?
Because I don't see it on shelves anymore. I miss Roman meal bread.
Yeah, I've always wondered about banana brands and banana branding and how you would market that.
So you're saying on a banana sandwich, it's bread and a banana.
Why not?
What about you?
Well, I would imagine that you take the peel off of the banana and then you mash it into a paste.
These are not the instructions.
And then once
it's the ingredients.
I would use a mortar and pestle to do that and mash it into.
So you're saying also just bread and banana.
And then I would dry the banana paste until I could turn it into a powder. And then I would sprinkle that over a wet banana. And then I would put that in between 2 pieces of Roman meal bread. And then it would be banana and bread, is what I'm saying.
So neither one of you has ever even really seen a banana sandwich.
I'm imagining there might be peanut butter involved.
Okay.
I don't know.
That was really what I was trying to get at is what do you put with the banana on the sandwich?
Hey, would you put a kiwi on it?
I'm going to say mayonnaise because I'm Southern.
That's extremely gross. No, the mayonnaise part's fine, but the fact that you're Southern is disgusting is all I'm saying.
Except I use veganese now instead of mayonnaise. So I use veganese with...
But wait, you're a Southerner who grew like Southern Alaska?
Well, no, my parents are from the South.
Oh.
I'm killing Michael's soul right now.
Killing him softly with mayonnaise. Killing him softly.
Oh, that's just so gross.
With Cool Whip and mayonnaise. And a spatula.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dreamland, the RetroBlasting podcast. I am Melinda, and with me is...
I am Aaron.
And we also have Michael French here in the studio with us today.
Hi.
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 Today we are talking about Revenge of the Jedi.
Yeah, but, I didn't think they had that emotion.
Well, I think George Lucas didn't think that either, and that's why he decided to change the title to Return of the Jedi. But as many of you, and most of you listening to this probably already know, originally the title of the movie was going to be Revenge of the Jedi. And so, little short backstory. Back when I first met Michael many, many moons ago, back in 2009, we actually met at a meetup.com. Remember this?
Yes, for all of our listeners.
Is this something that we want to disclose to all of our listeners?
Yes.
Yes, but that's not what it sounds like.
No, meetup.com is a place where you meet people with shared interests. It is not a dating hookup website. It is just, you can find other people who like to go rock climbing. If that's your thing, you go rock climbing.
Hey, you're getting awful defensive here. I just wasn't sure how.
So there was a Firefly meetup group back then, and so I was like, well, I don't know any other people who are interested in like geeky things that I'm into. So I went to this random place, and that's where I met Michael, and that's where I asked him out actually to go to an AC/DC concert with me. But that night when we got back from the concert, we stayed up all night long talking, and a lot of what we talked about on our first date was Star Wars, and it was exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. And that's when I realized that Michael was the guy for me because his knowledge of this and his passion for talking about it was so interesting to me, and I learned so much. I was like, wow, how did I never know any of this stuff about this? So it seems like a perfect topic to talk about, like that's at least not the same Star Wars crap that that everybody's rehashing these days about the new movies. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an interesting backstory that I think everyone should know about if you're into Star Wars. So Michael, why don't you take it away there and tell us about how, well, first of all, tell me how you came to realize that there used to be another script and another treatment for this film and how that rolled out in your mind.
So in the summer of 2002, I walk out of Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood where I'd just seen Attack of the Clones on opening weekend. And my friends looked at me and they said, so what did you think? And I looked at them without skipping a beat and I said, Star Wars is dead. And then I wandered off to my car, not caring how quickly they followed me or not.
So this turned into a Ray Bradbury novel. Basically.
Yeah.
You went to Venice Beach.
Or possibly a Nishi quote.
Right. Because see, up to that point, I had weathered The Phantom Menace. I had seen that movie 14 times in the movie theater trying to figure out why it wasn't coming together, because I thought there's no way this can't come together. This is Star Wars. This is George Lucas. This is the plan. This is how it's supposed to be. Why does this feel so broken? Why does this suck so hard? And I thought, well, maybe it's because I don't know the lines backwards and forwards like I do with the other movies. Maybe I need to memorize it. And no, it all kept going down, down, down. So I went to Attack of the Clones with the attitude of, okay, well, the last excuse we might have is that George Lucas was rusty. We're going to give this one more shot and we're going to see how things go. And it was worse than Phantom Menace in my estimation. And I was like, wow, this is dead. This is a pickled corpse. Like there's nothing.
Pickled.
So I said, where did this go wrong? And I went back to my apartment in Burbank and sat there for several hours, much like I did after I saw Seven for the first time, where you're just numb.
You're just dead inside.
Yeah, you're just like, wow, there's no hope
You've
for anything.
You've given up on humanity at this point. You're like, you've seen the darkness and it's consumed you.
Yeah, and up until that point, there had not really been a reason to get obsessed with the behind-the-scenes story of the original Star Wars, because there was nothing really going on that would send up the red alert that, what I've been told might have been false.
Well, there also wasn't an internet, so it wasn't like you
Right.
could just sit and obsess over that. You would have to buy books or read the fanzines. Or,
Right.
Yeah.
And that narrative was very tightly controlled, too. So you could buy the books, and it was kind of what they wanted you to think was going on.
Right.
It was the pretty version.
Get your tinfoil hats out, everybody.
Yeah.
But I went back to my
Mainstream sci-fi.
I went back to my apartment, and the 3 Star Wars posters that we have framed here in the studio were the ones I had in my apartment in L.A., and I was just kind of staring at them, just kind of. And then that's when I realized that the first 2 Star Wars posters, Star Wars and Empire, had the same producer, and the third one didn't. It was like, one of those games in an activity book where you're like, look at the 3 pictures and see what the differences are between the 3 pictures.
I'm getting this image of like a 90s movie montage of him, like, he's got a beaker and a test tube and he's just measuring things.
Yeah. I mean, I was like,
He's
wait.
pouring through books and pages.
I was like, wait a minute. I've always, I've watched the credits to the movies up until this point a few times, but not with any. It was just to listen to the music more than anything else when I was a kid.
So you started noticing that there were puzzle pieces that had changed.
Yes.
Even on those first 3.
Right. So I started to be like, okay, wait a minute. I need to dig into this guy named Gary Kurtz because he's not on Return of the Jedi. That was like my first clue. I was like, wait a minute. And so I started.
And at that time, what did you think of Return of the Jedi?
It has a soft spot in my heart because it was the one I saw in theaters as a child in 1983.
Yeah, me too.
But it's not the strongest of the 3. It's not a terrible movie, but it has some problems.
Yeah, but things like Yoda, especially when we were that age, I mean, there's lots of little things that just always make you go, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, like the sail barge fight. We're not talking about Hasbro here, but the whole sail barge.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even. Okay.
The whole sail barge scene was one of the best Star Wars scenes ever.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, so I started digging into Gary Kurtz. I'd seen photos of him from behind the scenes on the movies. I vaguely, I knew
Why did they get an Amish guy to direct this movie?
Well, what I realized was I knew Gary Kurtz from of the behind the scenes images.
Yeah.
I have never once seen an image of Howard Kazanjian, producer of Return of the Jedi. I'd never seen him in a photograph from back in the day. Like,
was he just not on set? Was he?
It just started. Something started to smoke in the woodpile for me, and I was like, "Wait a minute!" So I started digging around, and several months later, I don't remember exactly when it was, there was some critical fallout from Attack of the Clones, and I don't remember if they both did interviews, but I don't remember which one landed first. It was IGN and Film Threat both separately did interviews with Gary Kurtz, and they went to him asking him, hey, so this Star Wars thing seems to be unfolding a little weird. Maybe you could shed some light on that. And he was very candid about his experiences on Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and the falling out that he and Lucas had after Empire Strikes Back. And after that interview, the fan base that cared about this level of stuff sort of divided into two camps. There was the Lucas loyalists, and then there were the Gary Kurtz dissenters. And I fell into the second camp because Gary Kurtz, even to this day, doesn't have a reward at the end of the tunnel for telling his side of the story, whereas Lucas had every reason to preserve his mythology.
Yeah, I kind of didn't think of it like that. And maybe you can shed some light on something that I wondered for a long time, and it's become more obvious nowadays as everybody discusses everything about how a movie's made. But the role of a producer in a movie isn't always the same from movie to movie. So you have some movies where the producer really just puts up money and kind of manages that side of it. It sounds like Gary Kurtz had a little bit more.
Well, Lucas seems like he gets confused with what that word means, much like Steven Spielberg gets confused about what that word means. So it might mean something
in the Spielberg-Lucas world than it differently than what it would mean in like a M. Night Shyamalan.
Well, when you're a megalomaniac, no.
Well, no, Spielberg and Lucas are a little OCD about, they always want to be the creative powerhouse. They have never been traditionalist when it comes to the hierarchy of a film crew, and that has really caused some problems because now I know that back in the golden age of Hollywood, when you had the studio movie moguls, they would make a lot of decisions from their mahogany offices at the top. I get that.
Right.
But like George Lucas, for example, the very first thing he says in the DVD commentary for Return of the Jedi, right as the movie begins, is, so by this point in the production of the series, the executive producer had really become, the creative driving force of these, and the director was really just kind of there, to help achieve the executive producer's vision. It was being run more like a television series at this point than it was a movie set. And I'm sitting there going, okay, yeah, here we go. And those were statements that were made in 2004.
Well, and that's really interesting because from what I understand, yes, he got money for Jedi, but he had to put a lot of that money up himself, almost making himself an executive producer
Right. And that's where the trouble started after the original film, because after the original film, which George Lucas directed and Gary Kurtz produced, George Lucas said 20th Century Fox kept me down. They tried to take, too much from me. They almost tried to shut down the production because of money. He said, I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to take all my profits from Star Wars and I'm going to personally get a loan from Bank of America to fund The Empire Strikes Back.
And that was what, 10 million, I think? He asked for 25 and he got 10, I think. Is what I heard.
That was,
you said don't get too specific.
Well, I know for the first movie they budgeted him at 8 but eventually gave him 10 or something like that.
Yeah.
For the second movie, I don't remember the exact figures. But
Empire ended up making like $99 million. So.
Yeah, but oddly, it was the lowest grossing film of the three.
Yeah.
Not when I say lowest grossing, it doesn't mean it wasn't successful. I mean, it was still very successful.
What's like going to the Olympics and coming in third, right?
Right.
It's still pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Can we play 6 Degrees of Separation real quick and point out the fact that Kurtz met... When I say Kurtz, it's funny. So when I say Kurtz, I think of Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
Interestingly, Kurtz and Lucas met each other through Francis Ford Coppola.
Right.
And Francis Ford Coppola also funded with his own money Apocalypse Now.
Right.
Mind just blown.
So.
And then Kurtz went to Henson.
Right.
After he left.
Yes.
So Gary Kurtz and George Lucas came off the first movie, George Lucas saying, I'm going to executive produce the next film so I can control the money. and he said, "I'm going to get someone to direct the movie in place of me. Like, in other words, somebody else, so that I can focus on the money thing." And Gary Kurtz was still the producer. So he hired Irvin Kershner, who was a guy that he knew from film school, who was he directed The Eyes of Laura Mars with Faye Dunaway, but he was also a film professor as well, and Lucas had a lot of respect for him, or maybe he did a lecture at the university. Either way, Lucas knew him. They respected one another. Irvin Kershner wasn't very confident that he could do a Star Wars movie because there'd never been another one before the original, and it was a phenomenon. And so he was like, "Oh, I don't know, George." And then,
here's a true fact. Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, before he was in Star Wars, had never seen a Star Wars movie. I know that, but it's a big deal nowadays when you pick actors for things. But he did that sight unseen. He'd never had nothing to go on.
Yeah. It was a leap of faith.
It's very impressive.
So Irvin Kershner and Gary Kurtz got to work in England doing The Empire Strikes Back, and they took their jobs as producer and director very seriously from the creative standpoint. Lucas was dealing with the money.
Yeah.
So Lucas kept calling, the set every day saying, "So, what setup are you guys on?" And they'd be like, "Well, we're on setup 12." And he's like, "Well, you're supposed to be on setup 36 by now." And they're like, "Well, George, it's a science fiction movie.
Literally everything in it doesn't exist in reality."
Right. And it everything breaks down, nothing works. And they said the thing that they were also saying was, they were looking at the script that Lawrence Kasdan had written off of Lee Brackett's original draft. Lee Brackett was a movie screenwriter from way back who had died of cancer right after she did the first draft. Lucas Hangers-On will tell you that Lucas hated the script and all this kind of stuff. That I don't even think that's ever really been proven. But what I do know is that you can read, and I have read, the original Lee Brackett draft, because people like to say that Lawrence Kasdan swooped in and with a blank page and saved the Empire Strikes Back, and he's the genius behind it. But if you've actually read the original Empire Strikes Back screenplay, all of the foundation, all of the bones, all of the beats are there. They're just recouched in slightly different details and context and all that kind of stuff. Like Lando is a clone. Not the kind of clone we think of now because of the prequels.
Like the clone troopers. But
no, he's like, back then the idea of clones was a very different thing in Star Wars. We didn't know what it meant yet. And so he was this clone. And he came from a planet of people that were all just like him. It was this
it's very Star Trek, actually.
Yeah, but again, all of this...
Can you imagine landing there and it's like, my. If it times a million.
No, it is my turn.
Well, and that was the thing, was that he had left that planet and gone. That's why they got away with not having a million of, Landos in the script. But they figured out quickly. Leia was the one that figures out, meeting him. She's like, wait a minute. She's like, you're a clone. And he's like...
Which she would know because of her aristocratic upbringing.
Right. So there was a lot of interesting stuff that was going on in the script, but all the beats were there. They had to get away from the ice planet and then go to Cloud City and do the thing and all this. So all this stuff about Lawrence Kasdan, them throwing Lee Brackett's script in the trash and starting over is a lie. Just read the script. It's there to read. It's not hard. So anyway, he massaged the script, and then they started filming it. And Kershner and Kurtz would look at the script every day with the principal actors, with Hamill and Fisher and Ford, and they'd go, "Yeah, this dialogue, we can massage this. We know the characters. We can make this better." And so they would have meetings in the morning to talk about the scenes they were going to work on and the setups. And then meanwhile, Irvin Kershner was talking to his British crew, because the British crews, even today, they're extremely good. They're quirky, but they're really good at what they do. And he was like, "Look, I really want some good lighting for these scenes. I want." Kershner was a director who could see the images. Lucas was the kind of guy, if you watch his prequels and you watch, we'll give him a pass on the original Star Wars because it was so low budget. But if you look at the prequels, everything's pretty flatly lit, and not just because of green screen. Like, he's just like, is it in focus? Can you see it? Okay, good. Let's say the lines. It's not all that.
And when you say flatly lit, for someone who hasn't had a lot of experience with lighting, do you mean that everything is dim, or do you
there's
mean that
not a ton of shadow and there's
not a lot of depth to the
field.
image?
Right. It's the way Tim likes to light things. He loves that flat look.
That everything is completely lit.
Everything
so you can
is
see every detail.
No shadows in the background. No shadowing on the face.
Right.
There's no moodiness.
Right.
Like it's the opposite sort of like the Christian Bale Batman movies, which everything is really starkly so it's like severe shadow and highlights to sort of make everything look really noir almost and stuff. So it's the opposite of that.
Here's an interesting side jag to that, and I don't want to get us too sidetracked, but with the advent of modern technology and the improvement of the lighting in the TVs, how do you feel about what HDR is doing for this? Do you think that it adds to that texture, or do you think that it's making things too flatly lit?
No, HDR, when we watched the original Blade Runner in HDR 4K, it brought out all of the intricate lighting that had gone on and the set design to create that movie. And when you watch that movie, it's visually immersive. Like, you're just like, whew, and you're in the movie.
Yeah.
And boy, do those effects hold up.
They do.
Because I was curious.
God.
Because I know that when you don't have the HDR, all of your shadows look blobby, so that everything just sort of disappears into a dark smudge. And when you get the HDR effects actually brought back in the treatment, it just sort of falls away, and you can actually see into the shadows and see more of what's going on there.
Empire Strikes Back, if you compare it to Star Wars and Jedi, and especially the prequels, it is the most. It is the cinematographer's Star Wars movie. Like, real practical, and I hate to say this now because that's what Disney likes to push, but back then they didn't have a choice. It was all the sets were practical, all the stuff was there, and they had to light all of it. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like you were in a green room and then you got to create the Echo Base hangar later and light it however you wanted in a computer. It was, this Echo Base hangar is taking up an entire soundstage in London. We've got to light all of it, and we've got to make sure everything we want visible in the shot is visible. And then, everything has to be coordinated. So,
and as someone who has had to light just the tiny little areas where we film, I cannot even imagine how long it takes. I know it takes a really long time on movie sets. You hear about it all the time, to light the scene.
Right.
Hours.
And then you get out there and something's not right, and you have to send everybody back to the trailer to figure out what to do.
And especially when you've got robots and stuff that their radio signals are being interfered with by like local radio stations and stuff, and they're not going in the right places, and you've ruined a take, and you've got to start over, and you're burning through film, not a digital video chip.
You're burning through daylight,
Yeah, the other thing that I really love about practical, like you were saying, practical effects in lit scenes like that, from my perspective, if I were to try to direct something, I would actually enjoy all the layers that I didn't even know were there. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff that makes it to the film that you only appreciate years later when you rewatch it, whereas when you are creating it digitally, you kind of only get what you think of at the moment. So there's no happy accidents when you find that. And I think a lot of stuff, like even in Blade Runner, you'll see things that maybe even the director didn't see, but it worked really well. And you lose that opportunity when everything is crafted inside of a machine. Right.
It's perfectly engineered.
Anyway.
And so the lighting, the working on the script, trying to make the best movie possible, they were getting slightly behind schedule. And it was costing more money. And when we say behind schedule, we're not talking about like what happened on Star Wars. On the original Star Wars, they went way behind schedule. They were going to shut production down. However, as they kept going through it, this was only the second Star Wars movie they'd ever made. And it's not like they just said, well, we're going to do the same types of special effects we did in the first one. They upped the ante in the script and challenged the special effects house to do more and do better and all this kind of stuff. So all that was adding to the delays and the cost. And finally, Bank of America called in their loan because they got nervous. And so George Lucas got pissed because he felt like at the time, if you read the sources at the time, it sounded like he was irritated with Kirshner and Kurtz. But for whatever reason, as everything fell out, in the present day, only Kurtz takes the blame for it.
Well, yeah, the one on the way out the door, they hang all the stuff on.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
You see that in the professional world,
yeah.
too.
So Lucas was like, at the very end of the editing of the film, there's this story where Lucas and Kurtz were watching the effects come in, and I can't remember if it was an effect of the Falcon headed towards Cloud City or if it was the Falcon at the end of the movie under the medical frigate. It was something like that where the optical effect had not been composed properly. And Lucas was just like, well, we've only got like 3 weeks before we've got to be done with the movie and start sending the print in for duplication, so let's just leave it. And Kurtz was like, no, we can fix this. We can do it. We can get the people together. We can do it. And, because Lucas had to get more money, he had to go back to, I want to say it was either Bank of America or Fox or something and cut a deal, and he was irritated about that. And so he was just burned out, but they went back at the last minute. Kurtz was the one that personally went back at the last minute, got ILM together, fixed that one last effect, got it done, brought it back. Like, he was a passionate filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And Lucas got into a big argument with him, and he was like, we could have made this movie in half the time for half the amount of money, and it still would have made all the money back that it made at the box office. And Gary Kurtz said, yeah. He's like, but don't you think all this effort was worth it? And he's like, no, I don't.
Well, here's something interesting, and I did a little kind of light reading through some of the old books that I'd read on this topic today just to kind of get ready. During this passage of time you're talking about, there is some evidence and some discussion that he and his wife were struggling because he was working all the time.
Right.
And he was starting to come to the conclusion that people just wanted a roller coaster ride when they went to the movie theater. They didn't want an adult, sort of plot to the movie. And shortly after this, they made Raiders, right? Uh-huh. And then that ended up making even more money.
Right.
And I think all of that had an effect. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to have an effect on him where he kind of, that was where he started to have the idea of, let's bring the plots back a little bit. ILM is kind of taking over the world now, with the Star Trek The Motion Picture and other things that they were working on. And he wanted to sit back and give orders like he did with Spielberg and Kennedy to just have a movie made by his design in budget with less special effects and do something. So that, to me, that was kind of the beginning of that. I think I can do less and get more.
Right.
Well, and also I'm willing to pander to that lowest common denominator of, and I know people will be offended by this, but that whole idea of, well, we don't need a good plot. People just want that roller coaster ride. So if that's all they want, I'm not going to try to push something. I'm going to give them that and also give them a really good story too, so that the entire audience is completely fulfilled and it's very rewatchable. Mm-hmm. He didn't,
Yeah, he was
being
the
beginning of that Michael Bay kind of school.
He was headed towards divorce, like you said.
Yeah. They just adopted.
Right.
Yeah.
ILM had won the special effects contract for Star Trek II from the people that did Star Trek 1, which was Douglas Trumbull and the guys that had done 2001. And that was so acrimonious that Douglas Trumbull wouldn't even they politely asked him for advice on how to shoot the Enterprise, model, and he didn't even respond. He was just like, nah. And
I would be mad too.
So he was riding a business high at that point, but he was running that business with every fiber of his being. And so
I think around that time he also shut down one half of the studio too. There was one half that was, I think, in the north that was just riding high and spending way too much money, and he just moved everything to the ranch.
Yeah. And also just to point out that Empire Strikes Back did run into something that wasn't their fault during production, which was that Stanley Kubrick burned down an entire soundstage during the filming of The Shining right before that. So there was kind of a delay at a certain point.
But that Kubrick.
Yeah. But Lucas, he was just going in this different direction, and Gary Kurtz was like, well, George, what are we doing with Revenge of the Jedi? And Lucas was like, well, I'm going to, have a Death Star battle, and I'm going to do all these things, and I'm just going to tie all this up. I'll just make Leia Luke's sister.
How did Kurtz feel about there being another Death Star?
He didn't like any of it. He was like, no, that's not what we've been setting up. That's not what we've been planning, and George was like, well, that's what I'm doing because we're not going to go do a 7, 8, and 9, because the idea is that the end of Revenge of the Jedi was the Emperor escapes. Darth Vader saves his son from being killed by the Emperor, but the Emperor escapes. Leia is not Luke's sister because that was a big cliffhanger in Empire for everybody watching it at the time was there is another. Oh my gosh, who's the other? Mm-hmm. People thought it might have been Boba Fett. Like they were thinking, and then Boba Fett just went into the Sarlacc pit, and people were like, I guess it wasn't Boba Fett.
He fought his way out eventually.
Right. In every single version of the expanded universe, he gets out of the pit.
Right.
So, Gary Kurtz creatively was like, I can't get behind these changes. It's not.
Can I read like the excerpt of the one of the main interviews that is Kurtz, and it's talking about this. And so this is what he said. We had an outline and George changed everything in it. Instead of bittersweet and poignant, he wanted a euphoric ending with everybody happy. The original idea was that they would recover the kidnapped Han Solo in the early part of the story and that he would then die in the middle part of the film in a raid on an Imperial base. George then decided he did not want any of the principals killed. By that time, there were really big toy sales, and that was a reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is that the IGN or the Film Threat?
It's hard. It's a very long article that keeps referencing an interview, and I can't find
the actual.
Yeah.
It's some big, long thing where they're pulling stuff from him.
Yeah.
So.
I don't think there was any problem getting him to talk about it.
Well, there was actually for a while he didn't talk about it. And when he started talking about it was when the prequels came out.
Right.
And then people started right around the time when Michael.
That was in 2002.
So when Michael started thinking all that stuff, that's when people started going back to him. And other people must have been making these same connections as you. And they were like, we got to find this Kurtz guy because no one's ever really heard from him. He just kind of quietly went off and didn't really say a lot. And then it all came out. But like you said, he doesn't have a lot of reason,
Yeah, he doesn't have any real incentive to. It's not going to profit him to lie.
He also does not come across as someone, and I'm saying this because we talked to him at Dragon Con quite a few years back.
Yeah, we met him in person.
He gave a talk. Which I won't even go into what that all was like, but he was really good. He was talking about he's a collector as well, actually, and so Michael asked him a question about George Lucas and the changing the midichlorians and all this kind of stuff in the script, and he didn't back down from answering the question, but he also didn't delight in it.
Right.
Like it wasn't like he was like, well, that George Lucas is a real, he didn't do that at all.
There's no P.T. Barnum in him at all.
There was no hyperbole.
Yeah,
it just seems like he's just...
He was a Zen dude, and like
you said, there's no profit for him to create bad blood. Like there's things can only get worse for him.
Right.
The more he goes down that path.
Exactly. He's not, I did not get any sense from him that he was trying to.
Like there was an agenda.
Yeah,
he wasn't reveling in getting to talk smack about Lucas either. He was just very matter of fact about it. Like, no, this is the way that it happened.
It's kind of like Wozniak, talking about Jobs. There were some serious conflicts between the two of them, but now if you ask him about it, or at least in the biography that I read, he's very zen. He's just like, hey, we didn't agree on that, but we're good. We were good. I mean,
yeah. And that's the thing about Kurtz is that Kurtz's story from interview to interview has never changed.
Right.
Whereas George Lucas's story about how these movies get made has changed constantly throughout the last 40 years. And you're sitting there going, in every case, it changes in a way that makes him sound like the mastermind, even though all of this stuff was constantly in flux throughout its entire development. And that is on paper. Like, that's not refutable.
Yeah, there was a lot of serendipity involved in some of the good outcomes. And it doesn't mean that he's not talented. It doesn't mean that people working with him weren't. But everything had to come together in a very specific way sometimes for things to work.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I'm the unfortunate thing about all this is that Revenge of the Jedi naturally flowed off of The Empire Strikes Back in an organic way. And one of the things that Gary Kurtz talked about many times in his interviews about the first two movies and how they developed the screenplay and how they massaged the screenplays during production was the idea that they wanted them to subtextually work on multiple levels so that anybody in the theater, whether you're 5 or 55, will be getting something out of it. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't just supposed to be a movie for kids or a movie for adults. Like it was supposed to be this universal experience that everybody drew something from because each scene was layered with meaning and, you know, yes, the kids will revel at the fact that Luke lifts this X-Wing out of the swamp, but adults and people who are into philosophy will revel in what Yoda's saying to him at the time and the looks that are given and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And if you watch Return of the Jedi, the only reason that there's still some of that in there is because it's a third chapter of a story that was well established in the first two films. There's only so many places that story can go. And
right.
And
well, a lot of that team was involved in producing this, so it's going to smell the same. It's going to feel the same, even if someone else is driving it a little bit.
Right. But if you look at it, it's the Luke stuff that holds up the best in Return of the Jedi off the other two movies. The Luke Skywalker related stuff feels like the other two movies.
Right.
The Han Solo, the Leia stuff, it's all kind of crippled. Like it's all sort of faking it.
It's all kind of, to me, it feels broken because Han Solo, like, was not in that original script very much because he ended up dying.
Right.
And
well, Lucas wasn't sure, right?
Their whole Leia-Han relationship thing gets hindered by all of that. Like, it's not like a married couple going around fighting crime with Ewoks. Like, that's what ultimately that movie feels like at the end with the two of them. Like,
and in the expanded universe, they kind of do some of that.
It's like Scarecrow and Mrs. King meet the Ewoks. It's really weird. And Luke's story probably is a little closer to the original script. Because, I mean, like I've read parts of that original script, too, that you've got upstairs. And, I mean, it does feel a little bit more...
It feels stilted and forced when they are falling in love. Even, I mean, especially as a kid, it's kind of gross, right? You're just watching them and you're going, oh, okay, whatever, lovey-dovey stuff. But now as a grown-up, you're watching it going, it still feels kind of contrived that they would just suddenly fall for each other like they did.
Also that the only woman that's ever been in these movies is the sister.
Yeah.
That's the part that I had. That and the scene where he's like, Leia's my sister. It's like, how did you get there? Like, I would not have gone there.
The whole idea of the third film or the third trilogy, the 7, 8, and 9, according to Kurtz, was that after the battle to save Hal Abaddon, which was the original name of Coruscant, after the battle to take that back. Because if you think about it, if you're going to take over America, you kind of got to take Washington, D.C. So Coruscant is the center of the Republic, so they have to take that back. So that's where the final battle took place.
That's where the rebels end up going.
Yeah, that's the Endor of that. Endor was actually in the movie, but Endor...
You were saying it was actually kind of a utility planet.
So tell us some of these things. Like, that's the other part that I want to get to is all these things that are remnants that you can still see in the movie that kind of don't make sense.
That's the other problem. Yeah, that's the other problem with the Return of the Jedi as it exists is that the screenplay didn't even properly scrub out all of the previous versions.
So there was a bad copy-paste job.
Right, because one of the versions...
Because they were literally copying and pasting, like with paste with a brush.
Yeah.
You can see the early Ralph McQuarrie concept paintings for Revenge of the Jedi where you see Coruscant. We're just going to call it Coruscant for the purposes of this discussion because that's what everybody knows. So you got Coruscant and you've got them trying to build multiple Death Stars around Coruscant to protect it from invasion.
So there's kind of a Death Star shipyard thing going on.
And then you've got, I think it was like 2 or 3
multiple Death Stars. That just sounds kind of cool to me. I don't like the idea that they go back and have to defeat another Death Star gets a little tired, right? But the idea of there being 15 of these things.
Well, the thing was that they were all not active. They were being built because the emperor had decided that the rebellion had become a significant enough threat that he wanted to consolidate his power and make himself impenetrable.
And the emperor was located on
Coruscant.
Mm-hmm.
So in the actual Return of the Jedi, you will hear the emperor continually refer to Endor as the sanctuary moon. But when you stop to think about it, you're like, well, the sanctuary of what? And the truth
I thought it was a bird sanctuary.
And there's no context for that in the movie.
Right.
It didn't bother me as a kid watching it, but now that you mention it, it kind of hurts.
Yeah, and it's because
an Ewok sanctuary.
Yeah,
I hope
gotta
it's not
keep them
sanctuary.
safe.
Sanctuary.
it's because
Sanctuary.
the original, within the first 5 pages of even the draft I read, Coruscant is a planet that's entirely a city. It's all urbanized. But they have an orbiting botanical sanctuary moon so people can go and experience nature whenever they want. And what the Empire hasn't told anybody is that, well, we've put a shield generator on that planet to protect Coruscant from attack while we're building these stations to actively protect it. I mean, it was a whole thing. And there's been some speculation that that's where the Wookiees were going to come in, because there would have been a Wookiee prisoner camp on that planet.
Right.
And then, because we do know that he, in one of his early drafts of the Star Wars movies, he had a planet of all the Wookiees, and he couldn't afford to do that. So he created one, and that became Chewbacca, because he could only afford one.
Right, but then he needed these that were captured to be primitive, and he had already established that Wookiees were spacefaring, could repair a starship.
Right.
So he had to come up with...
But that's what he says.
Right.
Because then you sit back and you go, well, could it have been a Wookiee prisoner camp up there? And then he realized, well, I want to capture the Care Bear market, which is, he's talked about, capturing the teddy bear market. Ewok is a transposition of Wookiee.
Right.
So... it's like
you don't know who to believe there.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But no, that he has a precedent for making a decision based on toy sales.
Right.
So I could buy that. I would be more interested in there being a prison camp of Wookiees.
Right.
Because we know how tough Wookiees are.
Right.
And the idea of them helping defeat all of the stormtroopers is actually a pretty cool idea.
Exactly.
It's more believable than them just kind of going like, ootini. That's the wrong one. But, throwing logs at him and rocks.
Right.
But
and then
that was sand
and then
people,
what was supposed to? Oh, no, it's fine. And then what was supposed to happen was Luke was.
I always wondered if sand people were actually just kind of messed up Ewoks.
Right. And then Luke was supposed to go to his father like he did in the movie, except he was going to sort of win the argument, because he was going to be like, no, you join me, and together we will defeat the Emperor and save the galaxy. And then his father is like, this is my last chance for redemption. So they go to the planets. They go down from Darth Vader's big starship, the Star Destroyer. They go down to the planet. They go to the capital. They go to the Emperor's throne room. And that's when the Emperor's hold on Vader's mind is so apparent, because the Emperor still has this hold over Vader. Vader's easily manipulated. He's weak in the mind, because the dark side has overtaken him. But it all plays out, and you can see the paintings of the subterranean chamber. The Emperor's throne room was a sanctum underneath the bedrock of Coruscant with lava and all kinds of stuff, and his throne was on this island in a lagoon of lava.
Sounds great.
It would have been really awesome. So then the Emperor is going to kill Luke, but then Vader, like in the movie we know, he saves his son but dies in the process. But the Emperor gets away. According to Kurtz, the Emperor gets away.
Which, yeah.
Han Solo has died by this point. It's also possible that Lando might have died along with the Falcon. I don't remember all the notes, but Lando's death was always part of that as well. Luke realizes that he couldn't even defeat the Emperor with his father on his side. So he has no teachers left and only this limited amount of knowledge. He knows that the only way he's going to be able to defeat the Emperor is if he finds his sibling, who's still out there in the galaxy somewhere, that she's been hidden. So he has to train her. He has to find her. Leia has to go off and rebuild the government. So Leia goes off to rebuild the government, and Luke goes off on his own trilogy, which Gary Kurtz said was going to be almost like a Clint Eastwood Western, like a Man with No Name kind of thing, where he's in these backwater worlds, drifting, searching for his sister to find her, train her, and hunt down the Emperor before he can rise up again somewhere else. I think that's a much more interesting story.
Well, it also, like, a lot of that follows, they always talk about the hero's journey, which is also like the fool's journey. So there's the hero's journey that's Joseph Campbell, and then that's mirrored in tarot cards. So when you look at the major arcana that people talk about in tarot cards, where you've got the Fool, you've got the High Priestess, you've got the Wheel of Fortune, da-da-da-da-da. If you follow the plot of the movies, you can kind of follow it through just the same way. And where you get to the Hanged Man, just like Luke, hanging upside down, looks almost exactly like the Hanged Man, which is like around the 12th card of that series. By the end and the last, you've got things like the Devil, you've got the Tower, and stuff like that, which is like, it sounds just like what you're describing of the Emperor's throne room. Of everything breaking and falling apart and crumbling down and then rising back from that like a phoenix from the ashes, which is kind of what would have had to happen. But that doesn't really follow it in the current Return of the Jedi. I mean, it's sort of, but it's like a super watered down version of the hero's journey.
Let me ask you this, having said that and how it kind of falls apart in Return of the Jedi. When I was a kid, I saw that movie so many times. Like, you can ask my parents, I would just watch it, rewind it. At some point, I got to where I only considered that movie to be the first half of that movie. Like, I would watch it up to the point where the Sand Palace was speeding away, or they were speeding away on the getaway, and then I would turn it off because I just couldn't watch the rest of it anymore. It was just too silly. It just almost feels like they had it, and then it just sort of...
It's another one that's like two movies just kind of slammed.
Well, that's because the first half of the movie, or the first third, depending on how you look, I guess first third with Jabba, is the most untainted part from the original idea.
It kind of stopped feeling like Star Wars. Now, I do want to take a second and just appreciate how awesome the Imperial shuttlecraft was. Just because, I'm so glad we got to see more of that.
The scene with Luke later in the movie where all the stuff with Luke is really great in that movie. When he confronts the Emperor and
Death Star and
perfect.
It's not I don't want people to get the idea. I don't hate Return of the Jedi. I like Return of the Jedi, but I also know what it was supposed to be. And that makes it really hard to reconcile sometimes, especially
when they get to certain lines. Like all the sister stuff is pretty frustrating.
Sanctuary
Moon's kind of annoying now.
Right.
Thanks for that.
It's
yet one other way that Michael has ruined movies.
Sorry. but no, what makes it even more annoying is if they had gone and done what they had originally intended to do, it would have been impossible then for us to have gotten the 7, 8, and 9 that we got.
Right.
That's what I was actually about to ask you is if this had happened, what do you think the ramifications of that would have been? Would they have made the prequels at all? And if they did, would they have made them the same way? I mean, would they have been able to make them the same way? The tone would have been so different.
Yeah, the prequels, well, assume this for one thing. They didn't necessarily have to just start making episode 1. They could have waited a few years, only 3 or 4, and then started making episode 7. Episode 1, 2, and 3 can wait. They can make those almost any time because they were going to need younger actors anyway for Alec Guinness's character and all that kind of stuff.
Ideally, you would go on to make 7, 8, and 9 because you would have all of your actors in there, within a reasonable amount of time from when they stopped filming.
Right. Like I can see George Lucas saying something like, hey, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to pick this back up in 1990. We'll see you then. I think
Lucas, once again, was enamored with what Raiders had done, and he realized he had a different formula for making money, having family time, trying to get that work-life balance in, and just doing it that way for a while. I mean, he was just done, I think.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is kind of fine, too. It was kind of okay not having Star Wars movies for that period of time. It
was the dark time.
Oversaturated. It probably needed a little bit of a break. I don't understand why they even back when they made the prequels, they could have made the 7, 8, and 9. You know, they could have done something like that.
Oh, I know they could have, and it would have been.
It would have been pretty cool. Like they could have taken about the same amount of time in between, like the end of Jedi. Waited, said like they're picking up however many years later that makes.
You could have started with Luke finding his sister. And then all of that time in between could have been the time he spent looking. You know,
I like
there are
to
lots
dream,
of ways.
Yeah, even with Return of the Jedi being just like it was, they could have done that. And honestly, I dream of the idea of like, well, what if like they finds out in episode 7 that she wasn't really his sister, and that was all just put out there so that he wouldn't go looking for his true sister because they wanted to protect her. Blah, blah, blah. Like, I love that idea just because I hate her being his sister so much.
But that's why it's so broken, because him doing that at the last minute just to say, I don't have to make a 7, 8, and 9 now. I can go, you know, eat hoagies and just, you know, live in my mansion. If you watch Star Wars and Empire, it's very obvious that she's not his sister.
Sure.
Because
exactly.
Darth Vader can sense, in the very first movie, he can sense Luke Skywalker's strength in the Force at 17,000 miles an hour with 2 football fields between him and that X-Wing fighter in front of him.
Right.
And he's like, the Force is strong with this one. But he can literally stand there in a room the size of a broom closet torturing this girl and not sense that she has the Force.
Or that she's his daughter.
It's because, well, I don't think he could sense that was his son at the time. I don't recall that being the case, but he did sense.
You could tell that Force was being used or moving around.
The Force is strong with this one, whereas with Princess Leia, he senses nothing because she didn't have the Force.
Well, that's because the Emperor was hiding her, so he wouldn't be distracted.
No.
Yeah, that's what's
Palpatine's behind it.
It was Darth Jar Jar just still messing around with stuff.
It's
so here's a weird. Okay, this I could see the fires light in your eyes earlier today when I asked you this. There's just kind of a side conversation that was done with Kurtz, and he was talking about how it was originally to end. And I thought it was kind of funny because we've talked about how 7, 8, and 9 couldn't happen based on, you know, what they were originally planning to do. But I'm just going to say basically the gist of what he said in this interview. And it sounds a lot like how 7, 8, and 9 started. Because he just asserts that the first draft was darker, that it ended with Han dead, the Empire apparently, air quotes, defeated, and Leia running a broken and battered rebellion. Okay, just on the surface, that doesn't sound that different than what we have.
No.
I know. See, there go the fires. I knew they would happen.
Well, no, I mean, but let's be honest. They took a lot of suggestions that had been made and sort of took them in their own directions. But, I mean, they took old Ralph McQuarrie artwork and then repurposed it in a bastardized way.
Right.
They took – so, I mean, I would agree that some of that sounds similar.
I just think it's eerie. And here's where I'm going to jump back and maybe not get my throat cut by you. That being said, that this is very high level, similar to what we have right now, it's obvious that whoever took this and ran with it never went any deeper than that. Like, it just stayed right there.
Because there's nothing in that original outline that indicates that there is an Imperial Army imitator out there. The villains could be completely different in the new trilogy. That's why
I wanted it to be Thrawn, because at least there was some reason why Thrawn had his fleet.
Exactly.
And why it was intact and so powerful, in spite of it never being a part of the previous incarnation of Star Wars.
That made sense.
That would have
been that's also
natural.
That's the natural sequel to Return of the Jedi.
Right.
The natural sequel from that outline to Revenge of the Jedi doesn't indicate that there is an empire left. The villain could be somebody totally different working for a downtrodden emperor who's trying to rise back up. But
like he's starting his own new empire in some backwater of the galaxy that he's trying to build up his own forces again.
Right, exactly. He's manipulating another government out there somewhere to take power again. And
Well, either way, it kind of makes sense to me that in the power vacuum, you would have like the second stringers of the Imperial fleet. Like he had to have his B camera guy, right?
Right.
He was out taking care of stuff while the Emperor and Vader were over here doing stuff.
Right.
It makes sense that you would defeat the Emperor and Vader, or at least run the Emperor off. And there would be some Moff out there
Right.
to fill that power vacuum, whether it was revenge or
Well, it's like that
return.
robot chicken thing where like the Death Star blows up and then everyone's like, well, yeah, but there's still all of the rest of us out here, right? And they're like, no, it's over.
Yeah.
And they're like, but no, it's over. We're done.
I mean, just look at World War II. There were still islands in the Pacific that were fighting for weeks and months after the war ended.
And that's the problem. That's the problem with all this, though, is that Revenge.
We expect it to be real.
Revenge of the Jedi. The fall off from Revenge of the Jedi for the episode 7 they proposed back in the day was organic, and there was no indication that Han Solo was alive, let alone going back to being a smuggler.
Right.
And Luke did not go run and hide. Luke went out to find his sister to train her because he had to find
as
the Emperor.
Loner, like as a Clint Eastwood man with no name kind of guy, but not in retreat.
No, not in retreat. No, not at all. He
kind
was
of like a lone badass.
Well, that implies that the new one implies that he started his own school and then that failed, terribly.
Right.
Causing other things to go into motion. Forgive me if I'm getting too spoilery.
No. It's just it just all this proves that the way Lucas ended Return of the Jedi, it was a big mistake for the new filmmakers to bring those characters from that Ewok party into a future movie. Because
I think I just found my new punk rock name. Like band name, Ewok Party.
No, because they
By the way, did the Ewoks eat the stormtroopers? Because they were sure going to eat Luke and Han.
I mean, it makes sense. Eat what you kill.
Makes you wonder what the rebels ate that night, too.
I know. I did read somewhere.
Well, this article with the Kurtz article calls that a teddy bear luau, which is also not a bad name.
Well, yeah, so that's my point is that if you're going to end that way, it is folly for the new filmmakers to say, oh, we should take these characters, bring them back 30 years later and have them be in a pit of misery. You just need to leave them in the past and just use your new characters. And then they're going to go, well, the new characters aren't interesting enough for that. Aha! Well, then you need to write better because these characters are done. For better or worse, they're done. Mm-hmm. They shouldn't be brought back.
I like Ewok nuggets, too.
Yeah.
To call back to a live stream.
Fur nuggets, yeah.
No, not fur nuggets. That's awful.
Fur nuggets is in an early RetroBlasting video.
Don't you ever do that to me again.
What is that from?
Don't put that fur nugget on me.
It's from the one where we're talking about the Rancor monster. And
right.
So
it's like owl pellets?
So you could dissolve them and find the little bones and reconstruct the field mouse? Because I've done that before.
Yeah, that's kind of
in biology class. That's morbid, Michael.
Sorry.
Being morbid.
Sorry.
Just like Ewok bones inside. You just reconstruct your own Ewok. I just brought it back to murder.
Reconstitute it.
Just add water.
Bringing it back to murder.
It's like one of those gremlin toys. You just put it in water and then it grows into this giant monstrosity. Ewok monstrosity.
Kill me.
It's all mangled looking.
Michael's just shaking his head like, oh, there they go.
This is where we sprinkle in a little bit of humor into the story.
Meow.
So, yeah.
I mean, wow. There's so much there.
What would the toys from the original version of this movie look like?
Are you serious?
Yeah.
You're really going there?
Well, yes, because we run a YouTube channel. A lot of it is about Star Wars toys, and also because George Lucas was very much thinking about the merchandising. So the question is,
okay, so what about the Emperor's throne room?
I'm thinking that would have been an awesome play set that I would have wanted to buy.
You're talking about the lava chamber?
Yeah.
Well, there was some other interesting stuff in the script as well. Like, at the very beginning of one of the drafts that I read, it was a later draft, still called Revenge of the Jedi. The pilot Wedge, who's been in the films up until this point, he's the other guy that survived the attack on the first Death Star because he got hit and he bailed out. And then he was in the Battle of Hoth with Luke fighting the Walkers.
I love Wedge.
Yeah, he's undercover in the beginning of the script as a TIE fighter pilot. He's like literally flying a captured TIE fighter.
So you could have Wedge in a TIE fighter.
Yes.
Like you take the helmet off and it's Wedge.
It would have been Wedge. That would have been cool. The other interesting thing about the beginning of the script is that when Darth Vader lands on this version, if I recall, this version of the script had Darth Vader landing, I think it was on a Death Star. I think it's been a long time since I've read it. It might have been landing on a Death Star or one of the Death Stars under construction, or maybe it was a shuttle landing on Darth Vader's Star Destroyer. At any rate, the guy's name is Grand Moff Jared, who comes off the shuttle. Vader's the one waiting for him. And then
that was his rival, right, in that iteration?
Yes, and they literally reverse the scene in the actual Return of the Jedi. In Return of the Jedi, his name is now Jared is now the one waiting for Vader to come off the shuttle. Mm-hmm. But in the original versions of the screenplay, Vader's the one waiting. Jared comes off the shuttle. Jared says, "You can dispense with the pleasantries. I'm here to put you back on schedule." And Darth Vader's like, "I don't want to be managing this construction project anymore. I need to get back out there and find Luke Skywalker." And he's like, "You're lucky the Emperor's letting you do this." He's like, "Because you messed up royal. Like you didn't get Luke. You didn't capture the rebels. Now they're still out there. You are not on the Emperor's golden list right now."
It's interesting you say that, because when I watched these movies as a kid, I remember seeing certain scenes where there seemed to be various non-Force using characters who had the ability to cow Vader.
Right.
And something about that made Tarkin scarier to me.
Right.
The fact that he was not intimidated by Vader and that he could kind of tell him to shut up.
Right.
And I like the idea of there being a Moff who's kind of just like, whatever, dude, you really messed up bad.
Right.
So you're lucky you're even allowed to do this part.
Yeah, because he was saying...
Well, and it makes a lot more sense coming out of the last movie.
It does. He was like, you took our fleet out into the middle of nowhere. You got several Star Destroyers destroyed. You didn't get what you went out there for. The Emperor's
think about
not
the capital caught, like the loss of losing those multiple Star Destroyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was a very interesting script because...
Well, and then the Death Star in the first one, too. Let's not forget that, which he was involved in that whole fiasco as well. So, he would definitely be on a performance improvement plan.
He'd be on the PIP. I saw Clerks, so I do know that some of this math has been done.
Well, yeah, I've seen a lot of Robot Chicken, too, where the Emperor is, like, calling him on the cell phone. He's just like, I can't repeat it because it would be...
It's swearing,
but it's
I can't hold your hand anymore, Vader. A hand I gave you, by the way.
Well, I think they did some math and found that if you had janitors cleaning that place, it would take, like, several thousand years to actually just sweep the floors. Right. Because the amount of surface area...
There's Roombas for that.
Well,
the little mouse in the little car.
By the way, I found a 3D printable model for. I haven't started on it yet. But
really?
You can print an MSC droid. Is it MSC droid or is it MSC?
I didn't even realize that. I just always called them mouse droids.
Okay.
We're not going to get into AT-AT versus AT-AT.
Oh, it's not. Dang, man.
So
I learned so much when I hang out with you, Michael.
I've not had the privilege of reading all the different versions of the script for Revenge of the Jedi. I've only read like one or two versions of it.
There is a book that I'll go ahead and mention that I'm sure people who know about this are probably, and I don't know if I said it at the beginning of this episode, but it's called... We have them sitting here. The Star Wars, the annotated screenplays for all three of the movies. But this is put out by
Del Rey.
Or approved by Lucas. It's sanctioned by Lucas. They got permission from him.
Oh, okay.
Thus, a lot of the ideas that we have been talking about are not really represented in this book, as far as I know.
I mean, there's a number of them from the scripts that Lucas worked on with Lawrence Kasdan, of course, that's going to be in here, which are the only real scripts that we're able to read, because when Kurtz and Lucas had their falling out, there wasn't really a script yet. There were outlines.
I'm just making that clear so that if somebody goes and looks this up, they'll be like, what are you talking about, Michael? And we're just talking about concepts that were discussed verbally that were never put into a script. But
there were some weird ideas that were thrown around even after Kurtz left. Some of the versions of the script have Anakin Skywalker still in them as a separate character, showing up. And or no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of earlier versions of Empire. See, it all starts to mix up. Sorry, not Anakin. It has like Obi-Wan's ghost showing up in the throne room to fight the Emperor while Luke is fighting Vader in the throne room.
That's oddly foreshadowing.
Right. Right. It's yeah.
For some reason. I don't know why.
We
I don't know.
won't say why.
So sorry, I didn't mean to. Anakin's ghost shows up in the original draft of Empire.
And at the end of Jedi.
Well, right.
Yes.
And then he changes into someone else.
He gets younger.
I don't know how that happened. I watched the movie one time and it was this one guy, and then I watched the movie again another time and it was a different guy. Really spooky.
So yeah, Anakin, or the person who would become Anakin, was a ghost in the original Empire Strikes Back script because Darth Vader was not yet Luke's father. And then in Revenge of the Jedi, you have scenes like Obi-Wan's ghost showing up and literally like having these side conversations with the Emperor as they watch their two students fight it out. I mean, it's really weird.
Well, it's like going back and reading Tolkien's early drafts for each chapter. His son recently put out, like a decade ago, not recently.
That's recently.
Put out a book, for us in terms of, 80s nostalgia. Put out a book that had first draft. I'm talking back of napkin drafts of these chapters. And in the chapter where the hobbits are escaping or leaving the Shire and they're met on the road by the ring wraith, in the initial draft, that was Gandalf. So, like, there are some weird things that go on there, too.
Right.
Well, Star Wars is just, I don't know if you guys think about this, but we've been immersed in it for many years, so we can kind of speak this language. But for someone who isn't very steeped in it, it's got to be so confusing because, first of all, you've got all this background drama of, like, other ideas. Like, even the first Star Wars movie, had a vastly different script originally. Then you've got like the original theatrical releases of these films, then like the 47 million different versions that Lucas has made over the years and tried to erase previous versions, which a lot of my coworkers didn't even realize that there wasn't just one Star Wars. Most of the time with a lot of movies, there's not just one version of that movie. But
with Star Wars,
I think everybody who's listening knows that, but Star Wars is like really, really bad with it because we've been fighting for years to get access to those original cuts of the movie, and he's just like, nope, not going to do it. So there's that, and then you have the prequels, which came, like chronologically in movie making history, like after, but they are like they're before, and so people don't know what order to watch the movies in, and it's just very confusing. It's a very confusing universe, and it gets more so every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
Because, you had Rogue One. I can't tell you how many people I know who are like probably what I would consider muggles. They're people, and I'm not criticizing. They just don't really follow this stuff. They did not understand that Rogue One is going back to right before the first Star Wars movie in movie timeline.
Right.
They thought, well, I don't understand who... They thought that Jyn Erso was Rey.
Right.
Because she's a brunette and she's a girl and she's in a Star Wars movie. And they're like, I don't understand why that girl is like acting the way she is. She's not even acting like Rey. It's like, because she's not Rey. That's why.
I hope we've come further than that as movie watchers.
No, we haven't.
No, we haven't, though.
We haven't.
It's like
we're still.
She's got a different name, guys.
They don't. Pick
and she
up
has parents.
They don't.
It's like the wrong decade.
It's a roller coaster ride, Aaron. We're not really paying attention. We're just watching things
Ghost Dog
happen.
is in it, man.
Forrest Whitaker.
Hey, I love that guy. So the references I made tonight were, like, the research I did was from a book called How Star Wars Conquered the Universe by a guy named Chris Taylor. Mm-hmm. I heard about this book on a Weird Things podcast years ago, and he did an interview with the guys on that podcast. So I went and checked it out. It's interesting. It's got a lot of information that's kind of about what we talked about tonight, and then all the way down through how the 501st came into being and other anecdotal stories. So it's a fun read, especially if you've already been through all the stuff we talked about tonight. You may still find some nuggets in there that you hadn't read, and
Ewok nuggets,
some little fur nuggets. Yum.
There's also a book called The Secret History of Star Wars, which is a good.
It's not a secret anymore though, because it's a book.
I'm
So
just
maybe
giving
they
you-
Secret is out.
Maybe they should change the name to the revealed secret history of Star Wars.
I have that book. It's pretty good. So
Just write to them and say, I've got some notes on your book.
Got a couple of furry nuggets for you.
So any other recommended things to like research this? Read the original screenplays. A lot of them are out there for free on the internet. They're
I haven't
pretty
done that
interesting.
yet. I'm definitely going to bite.
yeah, it's harder to find all the different versions of the screenplay drafts.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a version of the Revenge of the Jedi draft out there on the internet. The very first version of Empire is out there. I believe there used to be, back in the late 90s when the internet was a freer place, there was a website called the Star Wars Script Archive, and you could just go there and download these awesome
They had like the PDFs of it.
PDFs of all the
Amazing.
different
I
versions.
mean,
Hey, if there are any listeners out there who have all these, let us know.
I'm sure, because I've known lots
us
of folks who back in the early 90s
Yeah.
when things were freer, they didn't just go read the stuff, they archived it.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
put it on zip disks or whatever. You
Yeah,
know.
if you can still like get your zip disk to read, because I actually bought a zip disk drive.
Yeah.
Because I had so much of my like grad school stuff on zip disks, and it's like
And a bunch of 128 kilobit per second MP3s of Metallica, I'm sure, just to make Lars angry.
I only bought that stuff just to piss Lars off because I had already given up on Metallica.
But the zip disk didn't work, did it?
Oh well, one of them was corrupted.
They have a shelf life that's actually shorter than a CD-ROM.
It's
so-
super sad. I didn't think about that, of course, at the time. But yeah, I lost some of my stuff that I've written. But
I used to have a zip disk drive that actually mounted in the machine like a floppy disk drive.
Yep, me
'Cause, you know,
too.
initially, I had that little blue one that everybody had that
Of
sat off
course.
to the side.
That's
Right.
right.
But then when I found out you could wire one directly in through a SCSI plug or something, I just, oh man, that was awesome.
I had that in my giant desktop computer. It was like
the brownish beige one.
and it had like, it looked like a slightly different color because you like put it in yourself.
Right. So
Yep.
over the years, as you add things, you would get like fresher pieces of plastic so that it would, yeah. And here's another little nugget for you guys. I used to fix computers, and this is something that is always weird. This is a weird Aaronism. Whenever someone brought in a computer to get fixed and I turned it on, the first puff of air that came out of the back of it was always like a cube of air from that person's house. And it was always this weird sort of like read the tea leaves, get an idea of who this person was, because you couldn't avoid, like sometimes it would puff out and it would smell like just cigarettes, you know, and you're just like, okay, now I can kind of figure out why your computer's not working. And then the other one that happened a lot was banana bread. So if you have one of those banana bread PCs, I'm sorry, I'm talking about you right now. That was really uncomfortable for me.
And yet sort of comforting.
Yeah, now, you know, everybody's got cell phones. You can't.
Yeah, there's no smell.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Giles
I
said
don't-
in Buffy.
I don't like other people's phones.
He was like, you know, you walk in the computer lab, he's like, take a deep breath. And, you know, Miss Calendar's like, I don't smell anything. He's like, yeah, exactly. Books have a smell. I like the smell of books. So you're never going to convince me to become a techie person. And then she was just sort of like, oh. Miss Calendar. Next time we're talking Buffy. No, thank you very much, Michael, for sharing your wisdom
Sure.
with us.
Yep, I'm glad to have another little slice of Michael.
That's right. Serve it up. Nice.
Right next to the nuggets, I got a little spot for it.
That's right. Dessert. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. You can find us on the internet at retroblasting.com/Dreamland, and all of our show notes are there. And we look forward to talking with you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.